I'm the Director of Strategy at the Built Environment Trust, which runs the Building Centre, and we're delighted to host this event this evening. And I'm just going to get off very quickly, but I just wanted to welcome you to the building and say how excited we are to have this event this evening. Unfortunately, Gerald, who's been involved in organising it on behalf of the International Building Press, he's not here tonight. So I'm going to be handing straight over to Nick Duxbury, who is the facilitator. But I would like to say that the IBP is a fantastic organisation. I know they're doing it with City University, and I think some of you are from City here tonight. But the IBP, I actually joined, I think, a long time ago, and then I left it. And then more recently, I sort of re-emerged in connection with it, and I was delighted to sponsor one of their awards. So we sponsor the Young Journalist Award each year. And this year we extended it to giving some bursaries. And in our first issue of our first ever journal, after 86 years, this organisation has been going, finally went to print. We've been doing a website, we decided let's get back to print. So we produced the journal, and in this we feature an article by the winner of the Young Journalist Award, and it's a fantastic article all about why we should start building things out of stone again. So it's a glorious 3,500 words, and you can write lovely long pieces, and so we're into sort of really serious heavyweight news made out of stone. And tonight we're going to have a very interesting discussion about actually more lightweight things maybe, but also some very serious things given the election coming. So over to Nick, and I'm really excited by the presentation.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. And thanks very much everyone coming along. We've got a nice little flavour of what the IBP is and how long the IBP has been around for and what it does. But I know everyone here is desperately interested in politics and specifically fake news, judging by the door. Everyone here was for fake news. Now, I didn't tell either Jim that we were really going to be discussing fake news, so they're under the impression they're here to talk about much more serious matters, and there's quite a few facing us right now. So just to introduce our two Jims, first of all, we've got Jim Pickard here, Chief Political Correspondent at the Financial Times, and then we've got Jim Waterson, who's Political Editor at Buzzfeed, two very, very different publications with very different readerships. But the same topic. So the reason I wanted them here from such different titles was to get a feel of how they go about A, reporting on the crazy madness of politics right now. It seems like an accelerated soap opera. And B, how they do it from very different publications' point of view. So to kick off, I thought we'd ask Jim to sort of give us a bit of context. Jim, number one, Jim Waterson, a bit of context about how he ended up at BuzzFeed. And what the average day at BuzzFeed looks like, because I think that more than anything else is the thing most people wonder at the outset.
Yeah, everyone seems to think we sit around on beanbags at home in our underpants, but actually we do actually have an office and go into work. So, I mean, first of all, you can clearly see if you want to get into political journalism, you have to be a white man from North Yorkshire called Jim. So that's the first requirement, really. But the sort of state of things are, so BuzzFeed, I joined BuzzFeed way back in 2013 when there was 10 of us in a basement room somewhere in Hatton Garden. It was seen as a complete joke of a site. Many of you probably still think it is. And it specialised in fun lists, things explained with GIFs, cat videos, and we still happily do all that. But what we've done is sort of grafted onto the side a lot of investment in proper reporting. We've got a politics team of 4 politics reporters. We've got a desk in Parliament just down the road from these guys in Westminster. We've got people in Mosul at the moment. We've got reporters all over the world, and we're opening different branches all over, every country, Mexico, Berlin. We've got France. We're doing a lot on the French election there. And the strange thing that we found was that people who want to see 13 pictures of Beyonce with funny captions also not stupid. They want to read quite in-depth reporting. You can go viral if you get an exclusive. You can get a lot of readers if you do good journalism. And so there's a lot of things about how we go about our job, but the main one is story selection. So we spend a lot of time not writing things. We spend a lot of time not covering the Prime Minister's speech that day. We spend a lot of time not worrying about the thing that the Today programme is leading on. Because frankly, if you're interested in politics, you've probably heard it on the Today programme, or you're watching Sky News, you've picked it up from something else. So we don't try and cover everything. What we do is we publish far fewer articles than our rivals and try and make those ones that we do go viral. Now, there's the one thing to take away, and I know we've got quite a mixed crowd, but so this is the one sort of rule that we've developed. You won't go viral with news unless it's either in-depth and definitive or it's pleasingly trashy. The real sort of death spot is stuff in the middle, which is what makes up a lot of traditional newspaper reporting. Here's a thing that everyone's heard about already, and we've written it up again for our audience. Well, if someone's interested, they've already seen it on the BBC News website, they've already seen it on the Guardian website, or they've already read it in the FT. For those of us who spend half our salary trying to read Jim's work behind a paywall. Perversely, I'd say that despite the intro, I actually see more in common with the FT for a lot of what BuzzFeed's trying to do than with, say, the Telegraph. Because the FT does scoops, it does exclusives, it gets original stories, and it's quite premium. And then you've got the sort of happy, sort of trashy stuff that we still love at BuzzFeed. And what we don't want to do is end up being another publication that's filling in the middle ground. So we either want to have a really in-depth scoop that you can't get anywhere else, or we want to have something really fun and viral. And actually, that's not dissimilar at the top end to what the FT aims for. So I can rant on about a lot of things. I can talk about fake news and why I don't really think it's a problem in the UK. I can talk about how BuzzFeed really functions, and I can talk about the way that certain words in a headline and the emphasis that we place on publishing tools to work out what goes viral. But fundamentally, the thing that we've learned over 4 years is you can build something from scratch and you can build up an audience. And unbelievably, you can do it if you do it properly. But it will cost you money, and you will have to put a lot of effort into hiring good journalists, building up some credibility, and convincing people to jump from good jobs to your mad idea of a startup. But it is, a little bit of optimism in a world of like everything in journalism going to shit. There is a good way. There is a way of saving something.
So where did you come from before you came to BuzzFeed? How did you get there?
I worked for 2 years at the glorious publication you've seen on the floor of the Tube, which is City AM.
Can you tell them about the egg?
Oh yeah, okay, I'll tell them. Oh yeah, yeah. So the only story I've ever actually broken of note in my life, and actually it is a construction crowd, so it'll work, is frying an egg using the reflected heat from the walkie-talkie skyscraper, which I was trying to make it as a political journalist for a publication no one wanted to speak to, and then no one would speak to me, and then I turned up the day after doing that, embarrassed by it, and all of a sudden all the spokespeople would talk to me and went, "Oh, you're the egg guy." That was it. So yeah,
10 years later.
Exactly.
And what is, when you start out your day, you've got all of the same on-diary news going on. What is it that you look for in a BuzzFeed scoop?
Oh, I wish I had more of them. I mean, basically, it doesn't matter if it's a smaller story, if it's exclusive or no one else has got it, or there's a picture that no one else has got. Just think of how you read the news online, and you don't read the second take on it. You don't read, and something's got to be, I always say, funny, different, or exclusive, or it won't go viral. And I do think that going viral is a good thing, because that's people wanting to read your work. And going viral can mean, if you get a scoop on the House of Lords hereditary elections, then my God, there's only 5,000 people who care, but you can reach that 5,000 people. So we adjust our expectations depending on the topic. It's not like we want everything to be 2 million views.
So you said earlier that there's quite a lot of not running stories.
Yeah.
What's the kind of ratio between spiking and pitching? And
Oh, we don't want to spike, but you just try and not start writing the story that you know is going to be read by not particularly anyone, because it's just a press release rewritten.
Sorry, what's spiking?
Sorry, spiking is when you write a story and then the editor goes, "That's the worst thing I've ever read, you're not running it, why did you spend a day on it?"
Yeah, that.
In the old days, there was a metal, literally a spike, and they would just go. When I started journalism, you would witness them taking a piece of paper and just go. That's the word.
So let's say, and take maybe something your day to day. What does that look like?
Oh God, I'm trying to remember. I can't remember this morning. But lots of running. I'm working on a big feature at the moment on the rise of the Corbynite media, and so I've been talking to a lot of people who have readerships more than most national papers, but whose publications you've never heard of, because that interests me, and I think it might interest enough people in this room. And if enough of you then share that on Twitter or Facebook, then we've got an audience. So that's the kind of thinking. It's not the obvious campaign story, but it probably interests, hopefully more people here than us just writing up a press release again.
I mean, you've got, like most of the people that work at Buzzfeed seem to have independently almost kind of, they've got huge Twitter followings each one. Can you make something almost go viral just by the personality group you've got?
Yes.
Fair enough, that's powerful.
Yeah. I'd like to think that it's probably not, hopefully not cut through to the real world, but I'd like to think that if it weren't for BuzzFeed staff tweeting about Tim Farron inviting people to smell his dog today, that we wouldn't have made that go viral. So, you know.
It's very unpredictable, isn't it?
What, sorry?
Things you think might go viral don't go viral.
Exactly, yeah.
And like things you think might be quite boring are suddenly retweeted. Like I did something on the Green Investment Bank the other day and it was retweeted 500 times. And it seemed really boring when I wrote it. And vice versa. It's not, that's the weirdness about what we do now.
Never believe
on social
anyone who
media,
says anyone really understands this. So just keep listening to us, basically.
So, I mean, how do you go about sort of approaching stuff in Parliament? Because obviously you've got lobby passes and stuff. What's the sort of dynamic there compared to some of the
I mean, the thing is, we're really quite boringly traditional. We're hiring reporters from Emily Duggan, who was the Independent's chief reporter before it went online only. We just hired her. We've got Heidi Blake, who used to be the deputy editor at Insight at the Sunday Times, running investigations. We're basically hiring a lot of very traditional reporters and then just saying, bring in whatever you've got. So it's surprisingly traditional in how we run the newsroom. It's more like a paper in 10 years ago than a lot of papers are now. I imagine I don't know what it's like at the FT gym, but it's probably the same sort of system, pitching in the morning, editor, back and forth, the editor arguing over a line and then choosing what you run.
Because I mean, one thing that I'm quite keen to get a sense of from both of you is what the kind of lobby itself is like. This little bubble of Westminster.
Well, I think you should ask the man who's been there
far too long.
Far longer, too long.
Far too long.
Well, let's take an early impression, and then we'll move to a more.
Well, the lobby, which is the group of political journalists, which is like one of the few closed shops in Britain in journalism, really, I'd say. It's both wonderful and very odd because you have every publication with 2 or 3 reporters, all working together, not as part of their newspaper. You're all, living and working on the same corridor, basically. Well, not living. Some people, you do occasionally see someone who's probably been there all night. But you hunt as a pack. People are chasing each other. Your competitors are the people who you're working with and in the group with, and there's a weird sort of collaboration. So it does mean that people end up chasing the same story, which can sometimes be bad if you end up with people being unable to break outside of that defined narrative, whatever was on the Today programme this morning or whatever was in the papers overnight.
And I think that was kind of born of a paranoia, wasn't it? So in the days before the internet, you would have a situation where if you woke up and had your breakfast and the Telegraph had a massive splash and it was a story that you, in a way, if it was a story you hadn't even thought of, you can live with that. If they've got some brilliant angle on an event you were at and you were going to get a phone call from your news editor saying, why the hell have you missed that? So there grew up this kind of self-protecting defensive mechanism whereby you'd come out of a speech and you'd say to your other journalists, I thought this was the interesting line. They would say, did you notice they said this? Does that reflect a change of policy? And you end up kind of cooking up lines. I mean, and if you do a Sunday duty in the lobby where there's just one person from each news organisation, there's a lot of that kind of, what have you got, what have we got? But I personally think that with the internet there, I do much less of that because I kind of calculate that by 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the evening, I can see what other people are doing and jump on it. So therefore, I'm more likely to trust my judgment. But that's the origins of why people act like that, isn't it? It was a kind of people covering their own asses.
Sounds productive. I mean, one thing with BuzzFeed that I've sort of often wondered when I from the outside is how you go about communicating internally with stuff like politics versus because I mean, has politics now become like sort of mainstream is not the right word, but BuzzFeedy enough that it takes a lion's share of the audience when you promote stuff?
What for as a site?
So I mean, when you started out, it was just you, and now how the team's got 4.
It depends on whether it's a good story or not. It's as simple as that. I can write a 5,000 word piece that's boring and no one will read, or you can get something that just hits the spot and goes incredibly viral. I think one challenge is online is that stuff has been made. You can't really do this MP did a silly thing stories because Twitter has killed that. Everything basically is just living on Twitter or on Facebook directly. So writing up a story about that, you're probably late to it, and it's probably already gone around and been seen by everyone who's interested in it. So if you want to get traffic for politics stuff, you've really got to have news. You can't really get readers online unless you've got something, as I say, exclusive, different, or funny. You won't get them. So for us, that's the same. If we have a day where we're writing the main story of the day because we haven't got anything else, then we won't get readers. And if we have something exclusive, then it'll go off the charts.
But the only thing I'd say to that is that we think about news as exclusives. There is such a thing as exclusive analysis, and I will talk about the FT and everything later, but we do quite a lot of stuff which is just kind of, here's the data that explains this, and which is why X might happen in the future. And there's quite a lot of appetite for that. Whether you call it exclusive or not, there's still market out there.
What about formats? Because when BuzzFeed came on the scene, everyone associated it with listicles. But obviously that's changed quite a lot now, and you've got long-form editors, you've got...
Yeah, lists are great. Lists are really good. Lists are a good way of putting out information. Everyone's always like them. I used to buy magazines in the night. I don't know how we always got credited with inventing lists when I used to buy sort of The Enemy and PC Gamer in the 90s and sort of happily argue over whether something should have been at 89 or 91 on a list.
What are your 10 favourite BuzzFeed lists?
We'd never do a 10, Jim. It would always be an odd number.
11.
So yeah, lists are good, but we don't do that many of them because a news article is often a good way. Although we're doing more video, but if I've got a little bit of information to give to you, then 5 paragraphs of text on a screen is often as good as an infographic. I mean, better normally because it fits any format and you can read it on any phone at the bus stop, and it just works. So I mean, there's a lot to be said for just a picture and some text. Not everything has to be all singing or dancing to go viral.
And how do politicians feel about being interviewed for BuzzFeed? Is it something that they want because they've got this massive audience, or is it something that they're really scared about?
They normally like it. They normally like the idea. There's a lot of things with new publications where you can half of the effort is you can sell the idea that you're being interviewed. The act of being interviewed by BuzzFeed for a lot of politicians, especially early on, was almost half the story. Like I remember our first ever big interview with Ed Miliband when he was. God rest his soul, who was going to be Prime Minister. A lot of The Guardian ran a story that he was going to be interviewed by BuzzFeed, which was hilarious because actually it was a very run-of-the-mill interview. But yeah, they liked the idea that they were doing something different, and no one ever got sacked for, trying to look cool.
Is there one story or one thing that you're most proud of your time at BuzzFeed so far?
I'm genuinely just still amazed that we're getting away with it. I mean, it genuinely is as simple as that. Like, I'm amazed that the main progression is that I used to phone up press offices and be like, BuzzFeed, and they'd be like, I'm so confused, can you spell that out for me? And whenever we got a story, you'd get it tweeted out with people going, I'm disgusted I'm linking to that site, but this is a good story. And now there's none of that. Press officers deal with us like we're any other publication. People tweet our stories because they're not confused. They trust us. And so in the space of 3.5 years, we've gone from being a total joke to maybe a total joke that people trust or something like that.
Wasn't there that drinks party a year ago where David Cameron didn't know what the BuzzFeed was?
That was one of the best things that ever happened to us.
Have I misquoted that?
No. David Cameron was like, about a year and a half ago, said, I don't know what the BuzzFeed is. I'm too old for this, which was perfect for us. It was exactly the PR we wanted. It was great.
Superb. Well, look, I'm sure you've all got loads of questions for Jim, but first of all, we'll move on to the...
Old Jim.
I wasn't going to say old. I was going to say the experience.
Old media Jim.
I actually, the first time I saw you was at a Labour conference in, I think it would have been like 2008 or something. And Ken Livingstone I didn't know who you were, but Ken Livingstone was very drunk and had mistaken me for you. Oh. And
he pumps you in the head.
He kept calling me Jim. So I had to find out who he was talking about. And there you were. So
I'll take that.
Could have called you worse, to be fair.
Yeah. So obviously the FT, massively different proposition to BuzzFeed in some respects, certainly in readership. And I think before we go into all the differences and what the FT does really well and how you go about doing it, if we could maybe start with your career and how you ended up there, because did you have a sort of trade mag background? I can't remember.
Kind of slightly. So I know there are some people from City University here, presumably the journalism course.
Yeah.
So I did that about 20 years ago, and I did a bit of trade mag, and I worked at FHM for a few months, but my first real job was the Western Daily Press in Bristol, where I was a business reporter for a couple of years. And then the FT hired me because they misread my CV and thought I was the business editor of the Western Daily Press and not a trainee. So that was kind of fortuitous. Don't tell them. And so I've been at the FT for 17 years, and I started off as their West Country correspondent, so I covered Wales and everything from Cornwall up to kind of Gloucestershire. And then I was on the news desk for a couple of years, which I kind of hated, but it's a very useful experience just to kind of know how the organisation fits together and know things like, it's kind of like an internal market, and there are times to sell a story and times not to sell a story, and it was all okay. And then I moved over to do real estate and was the FT's property correspondent for 3.5 years, right up until the crash. So that was good fun. Got to travel Dubai, China, America, and the deals were getting more and more crazy. So it was quite an exciting time to be a business journalist. And joined the lobby, I think great timing in retrospect, just sort of 6 months into the Gordon Brown era. So I was there for the Gordon Brown decline and fall, for the rise of the coalition, and then the kind of Moore's law of political news just getting exciting things happening faster and faster. So Scottish referendum, election, Brexit, and all the rest of it. So that's where I am and came from.
Fantastic. So one thing that I was always, because I'd often see your bylines, and but they were everywhere. I mean, like you would have, probably still do, so apologies if you still do, 5 or 6 bylines sometimes in one edition. And I could never work out how you did it. So how do you do it?
It happens a bit less now that our pagination has shrunk slightly. So when I started out in Bristol, we had about 5 or 6 pages of UK news a day. And we're now down to 2 or 3, which means it's part of becoming more selective, particularly in terms of how we do politics and everything. The last time I had 5 bylines in the paper was last Friday. And it was one of those things where just lots of things that I'd kind of been on for ages had come to fruition. So the Green Investment Bank sale had finally happened, and I'd had the tip off the day before. So I kind of got a byline just by the colleague that I always did it with. She ended up writing most of it, but whenever I wrote about it, I'd give her a byline. So there's a lot of kind of teamwork at the FT, and ditto the Unite leadership battle, and Gerard Coyne getting axed and Len winning and all the rest of it. I mean, again, I'd been working with Sarah Connor on it, so and sometimes you've been working on something for days and it just happens to come to a head on the same day. So it's not like I'm on my own writing 5 different things in a day. That would be crazy. But in terms of kind of how the FT sees politics, I mean, differences with Buzzfeed. Firstly, people pay us money for our products. We don't give our products away for free. We clearly make quite a lot of our revenue from advertising, but that as a proportion of our total income has been falling. I think the last time I heard we were getting about half of our income from subscriptions. Something like 2/3 of those subscriptions are online. The paper, as a proportion of people reading the FT, is in decline. That's not going to come as a surprise to anybody. I wouldn't really want to be quoted on this, but it's not hard to imagine a future at some point where we were to go down to maybe just a Saturday print edition or no print edition at all. But whether that's 3 years away or 30 years away, I literally don't know, and it'd be very foolish to speculate about that one. BuzzFeed, as Jim says, is hiring loads of people like crazy around the world. So not comparing to them, but compared to the other British newspapers / websites out there, we have a much, much bigger presence overseas. We have over 100 correspondents. I don't want to malign the Telegraph, Guardian, Mail, Sun, and everyone else. They have literally skeleton staff overseas. Some of these newspapers have someone in Washington, someone in New York, maybe like a Europe correspondent, and that's kind of almost it. And a lot of the FT's USP is that we do have a full-time person in Jakarta, Sydney, Singapore, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, we've probably got 10 people. New York, we probably have 30. Washington, we probably have 6. We have people in Atlanta, San Francisco, LA. We have two people in Mexico. We have people in Peru. You get the idea. We're doing international news very, very seriously in a way that, let's say, the Wall Street Journal do, but not many other British news organizations. And I mean, 20 years ago, if you said to me, what did I think the FT was? I had the same view that a lot of people have, that it's just a kind of list of stock prices and numbers and maybe kind of financial news. And when people actually pay the very large amount of money that we charge, that's not on the record, when people actually pay for the FT or they find the FT and they actually read what's in it, they are usually quite impressed by the fact that it's politics, economics, general news, and analysis, and not just the finance stuff and the M&A stuff and the bond market stuff that you would imagine us doing. So in a way, the social media thing poses threats like it does to everyone else, and that the internet is just this vast, unlimited space that people can write stuff in and all the rest of it. But we believe that people will pay for quality, and we've been seeing that so far. And also we find that the existence of social media allows us to get out there and show people stuff we're doing, which isn't just lists of stock prices, which is interesting or surprising or detailed or witty analysis, and we can reach people and they can see that we're human beings and we're not kind of accountants just sort of sat there adding up and then telling people about our addition. So in terms of our politics, I totally agree with Jim that the way to reach people these days is a combination of analysis, preferably deep analysis, and hits that make an impression. So preferably scoops, preferably interesting scoops, because there are boring scoops. As Peter Mandelson once said to one of my colleagues, your story is exclusive and destined to remain so forever. He also once threatened to destroy my career, but that's a story for another day. I mean, the story I'm most pleased with that I've done this year is a kind of weird story, and it was a story that you may remember that Michael Gove kind of weirdly did the first interview with Donald Trump of any European journalist, and it had a massive display and 3,000-word article and video and pictures and all the rest of it. And what he didn't tell readers of the Times is that Rupert Murdoch was sat in the room at the same time, and that hit, we had sort of six-figure hits on that scoop of mine. Even though it was kind of weird, and at one point I thought, I don't even know if this is actually a news story or whether it's just a kind of line to give our media guy in New York, but that kind of worked. But the difference with Jim is that we still have people who come to our site daily, kind of religiously. We can't just, unlike Buzzfeed, where it is literally you go viral or you kind of get nothing, we have people coming in every day. So we have more regular news reports that, if I'm being honest, are not always going to be remembered for very long by everybody, but that's kind of a function of being a daily publication or a daily news organization. What we don't do, that some of our rivals do, is we don't do literally 8 or 10 political news stories every day, because we kind of feel it's overkill, and we feel the market is incredibly crowded, and we feel, I mean, particularly in terms of how we're going to cover the election, or have already started covering the election, we're trying not to literally do, today Labour said X about housing, the Tories insulted Boris Johnson, all this kind of hackneyed, quite weak stuff. We're trying to step back and pick our moments. And when I was talking about exclusive analysis, some of it will be more exclusive than other analysis, but I think that's what our readers are interested in. They want to know, you know, there's this kind of east-west line above which the Tories couldn't tread 20 years ago, and Labour completely dominated, and that line has been going north and west into Wales for the last 5 or 10 years. You know, getting the really deep data on that and explaining how it's happening, and also doing the vox pops and talking to real people as well, and mixing that all together. That kind of stuff people are interested in. We also get an awful lot of hits on analysis that tries to point forward at the future. So I think our best read story on FT.com yesterday was a piece about, could Le Pen still win? Especially for... You know,
that's a clickbait headline. That's pure clickbait.
Yeah, absolute clickbait. And yet, I personally think it's still conceivable. Because you have to remember our audience we have a lot of civil servants and we have a lot of political people and MPs and all the rest of it, but we are also telling the markets what's going on. And we do the one other USP that no one else in the lobby really does, although maybe the Times does a bit, is those kind of stories which are where business, economics, politics hits, and there's a kind of sweet spot. And one reason why I write a lot of stories is because I'm working collaboratively with colleagues on these kind of stories. To give you one example, when Cameron's government was desperately trying to save the British steel industry about a year ago, and you remember 15,000 jobs were hanging in the balance and all the rest of it, and I got the scoop that Sajid Javid was cooking up this scheme whereby they would change the pension accrual on British Steel, members of the British Steel pension scheme, of which there are over 100,000 retired miners, not miners, steel workers. And the whole thing was classic FT because it was kind of a bit technical and technically dull, and yet it was really important to 10,000 lives, and it was business, and it was politics. And I mean, it's very easy to forget now, but and I've never really written the story, but the day before the general election, they were desperate to get Tata Steel saying that they were going to rescue British Steel and it was all going to be okay. And Tata Steel just never signed this document. And apparently Sajid Javid was lying on the floor of his office, almost crying, because it just never came through. And in the end, the election, the referendum result changed everything. But and obviously Brexit. I mean, I could bore on forever. And maybe you should do a question. But Brexit, absolutely huge for the FT, huge hits. Global political, economic, financial chaos is obviously terrible for a lot of people, but it does generate eyeballs on the ft.com site, as you can imagine.
So we've got a little flavour of other gyms' day. What does yours look like? I mean, all these scoops that you're getting, are they mostly from relationships that you built up over the years with politicians, or are they with civil servants, or are they, without giving away all of your secrets, what's your sort of process? How do you work?
So stories come in from a variety of sources, of which MPs are quite a few, sometimes civil servants, think tanks, businessy people, business groups, your mate's mate, the person you met in the pub 10 years ago, the person who was at your talk 5 years ago. It's really, really random. And the kind of weird thing is that the person who was like the best man at your wedding or your best friend or whatever who works in some highly sensitive job, they are never the source. They're never the source. It's always just that guy who you do a bit of banter with on Twitter, and he'll just send you DMs telling you amazing stuff, and you think, I've never bought this guy lunch, I've never put in any effort, and he must be an amazing guy because the cabinet ministers I've just spent 100 quid on for Dover Sol has never given me anything. And you just have to throw the seed out, don't you? You have to just.
I hate it. I just, that's really, because I never ever had a proper editor because we came in at Buzzfeed, it was total chaos, and it's reassuring to hear that because the amount of lunches I bought and then sort of sat there doe-eyed at the end going, where's the story?
Yeah.
They never ever come up with the goods, but yeah, it is that random person who you don't even know.
I'm trying to think, I've probably had 300 political lunches or something like that, and I literally can't think of ever coming out of one with a front page story. But what happens is, you get to know those people and then you run into them outside the meeting where something interesting is happening and they will reply to your text. Do you know what I mean? There's a relation building takes bloody forever and sometimes pays off, but yeah, it is quite weird.
Speaking of lunch and the FT, one of most people's favourite thing about the FT is lunch with the FT. Have you done any particularly memorable ones?
I've done one that was completely forgettable, which was with an economist called Robert Schiller, who, when I covered real estate, he was being quite bearish on the housing market, and I was being quite bearish about property at the time, and we had a very nice lunch, and no one remembered the interview because it was quite boring. And I did a lunch with Bob Crow, which was much more fun, and I still have people who do remember that one. And I said to his guy beforehand, I said, an unscrupulous journalist would want to stitch Bob Crow up, and they would want Bob Crow to look like some horrendous champagne socialist, and they would take Bob Crow to the Savoy and they would buy him a huge side of beef and get him completely pissed on expensive claret. And I'm not going to do that because you know, I've known Bob on and off for years, and he's been all right to me and never beaten me up. And he can go wherever we want, and if he wants to have a bacon sandwich in a roadside cafe, because that's his brand, that's fine. Which is how we found ourselves sitting in Rules in Covent Garden, spending 250 quid on an enormous piss-up slash lunch. But I mean, the non-secret of that was that Bob Crow could give good copy at the drop of a hat. He was always kind of controversial. He'd say mad things. He was obsessed with the weather. He had a bulldog that looked like him. He had a brother who was an investment banker, even though he hated bankers. And my colleague Henry Mance, who's also in the lobby, is the king of the lunch with the FT. Yeah. He's a beautiful writer. He won Interviewer of the Year at the Press Awards a couple of weeks ago. And the same thing in a way that the people who've made the best copy for him are Nigel Farage, Richard Desmond, because they shoot from the hip, they don't give a toss, they want to be seen as characters, and they quite like riling our readers as well, I think.
Fantastic. Now, I'm conscious that everyone's probably got loads of questions. So just one from me before we go into all the questions. Is the news cycle for politics specifically for the last year, maybe a year and a half, has just been insane. And I've been quietly grateful I haven't had to be one of you guys running around like a nutter trying to capture it all. How have you done it, and how have you wrapped it all up? Because you weren't forward to start with, were you? So
no. We at one point last year was one. Drugs. Just working non-stop. It's great fun. It's the only way you keep going is like to. I actually am better. This election, I was knackered, exhausted, and really dead. And then they called the election, and I'm just buzzing. I'm just completely on a high, and can't wait to get. As soon as I'm out of this room, there'll be hopefully some replies to some texts and some stories I put in. There's news, there's stuff, you're going on, there's things to be done. And that's what keeps me going. I hate it when I come in and there's nothing going on.
Yeah, I got off a flight from 2 weeks in America, and I'd had 1 hour's sleep. And on the M25, just cheeky look at what was happening. The Prime Minister was 15 minutes away from announcing the general election. But you're right, there's going to be something to do. There's a bit of adrenaline. I think the other thing I'd say is that we do complicated stuff sometimes. And one of the things I'm proudest of being part of at the FT was when we investigated Tony Blair's empire in about 08, 09. And it was at the point when no one else had found out about Windrush and Firerush and this very complicated group of structures that he'd set up to channel his earnings from advising various unsavory regimes and investment banks and oil companies and all the rest of it. How did I get onto that? What was the gist?
What keeps you going?
Yeah.
Yes. Those sleepless nights.
So there's serious, complicated stuff we do. But I think generally, without wanting to demean political journalism, most of it's reasonably straightforward compared to the business journalism I was doing before, where there are loads of really complicated numbers and P ratios and net asset values.
And people will actually sue you.
And people that will sue you. Whereas politics, there's all these narratives which are kind of, you've been on them for years, you can remember all the twists and turns. So when Douglas Carswell steps down as an MP, which is one of the stories that happened Thursday or Friday last week, I can literally do it in 15 minutes because 80% of that story, or 80% of the first take on that story, is literally, who's Carswell, when's he become an MP, him leaving Tories, becoming UKIP, him leaving UKIP. It's kind of all up there. You just need to do a few links, add a few quotes. There's a lot of that which just kind of, it does, not to demean our profession, but a lot of it takes care of itself in terms of the intraday stuff, doesn't it?
Fantastic. And just quickly, with your business stuff, because there's probably quite a few business journalists or former business journalists in the room, or people considering becoming business journalists. Mm-hmm. Do you look back on that and see it as a sort of baptism of fire you had to go through to get to politics, or do you miss it? Because I mean, you do still, this is what I was getting at with all those bylines, you do still seem to have your fingerprints on business stories, and obviously the FT is a business paper as well. But
yeah, I mean, I enjoyed property, and it was a very good time for property because you had these crazy deals where, like, a group of Irish mates who were vets and doctors and accountants would sort of get together and put in some money, and they'd raise £2 million, and then they'd buy a £1 billion office block in Canary Wharf with sort of 98% leverage or whatever, and it was all quite fun and all the rest of it. But I think it went a bit quieter after I left. I think the similarities are that people will talk to you a lot, including me, in that if you want to get into the industry, you need to be able to talk about like really modern skills, like are spreadsheets modern, or am I just really old?
Yeah, you're old.
But data journalism, being able to just produce spreadsheets out of nowhere and being able to do like whizzy things online and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, it's still a kind of personality relation. It's a relationship-driven trade that we do. And the similarity with doing property and with doing politics is that you basically build up hundreds of people that you know on a lot or a little, but who will either talk to you or pick up the phone to you or tell you stuff or ideally come to you with stuff. But it's about relations, and no amount of data journalism will get you that Gove Trump story, which was literally some MP just told me it in a queue for the coffee at Paul
About
Cullis
to
House.
ask what the source was, because we'd interviewed him 2 days earlier and he hadn't said a bloody thing.
I had comments under the story going, this is like Watergate, man, and like, this is amazing investigative journalism. And it was literally an MP just said, oh, have you heard? Have you heard? bloody, what was his face? Murdoch was in the interview. Yeah, so
did you have to call Gove and say, or did you call the Times? Or?
We couldn't reach him. We gave him an opportunity to deny it. He didn't take it up. And then obviously I have talking about the collaborative stuff. I have media colleagues who do have contacts in the business world who can ask certain questions of certain media organisations, that kind of thing.
Noted. Fantastic. Promise, last one for me. Are you very numerate? Because a lot of people probably assume that most people at the FT are kind of naturally financially savvy and have just turned their instincts to it with a journalism lens.
So I think the thing that I found very helpful being at the FT is that I'm numerate in the sense that I can do maths in my head quite fast, and I can see if a number looks really dodgy. So if someone's suggesting that the cost of the triple lock is 50 million, I'll sort of know in my head that it ought to be a lot higher than that, or I can do that kind of thing. What I'm not is I'm not an accountant. I can't kind of predict that a listed company is about to go bust from glancing at its balance sheet. I don't think most financial journalists can. I think, and there are risks for all business journalists that you find yourself in some story where you basically need forensic accountancy skills, and none of us really do, apart from people who have been accountants and gone across or whatever. That, if I'm being totally honest with you, and that's the sort of minefield awaiting anyone doing serious business journalism.
Fantastic. Right, we've got a roving microphone. If you could put your hands in the air if you've got a question, and we'll send a microphone to you. Go, gentleman at the front.
Thank you. Do you want names?
By all means. And identify which gym you'd like to target.
I'm assuming this is on and people can hear me. Michael Poulard. I'm wondering whether both of you feel that politics is benefiting from the increased speed of the news cycle.
Okay, well, as we could probably easily get blamed for some of that, I'll start on that one. I don't think it's necessarily benefiting, but it's much harder to push out absolute bollocks now, is what I'd say. If you push out something at 9 a.m. on Twitter, which is a line which would have held for most of the following day's papers in the past, then by 9:30, the world expert on it will have seen it, weighed in, and said this is rubbish, and no one with any credibility will be able to run it. So that's the positive side. The downside is that there is zero time for getting the second quote. There's very little time even for double sourcing with a lot of places, so I'll often get a tip, which I'll try to stand up, and then you'll see that someone who's clearly sent the same tip to a rival publication, they've just gone, might be right, and chucked it out as a story. The main thing is I don't really think there's any way of putting the genie back in the bottle, so we've probably just got to live with it. And I know, if the FT runs it, I take that the equivalent as Bloomberg or a Wire running it. It's hopefully as good as fact. And if certain publications, which I'm definitely not going to be tricked into naming here, run it, then I would never follow it up without checking myself. So
yeah, and I agree with Jim that I think in some ways the quality of our journalism has become much better because you put up a first draft online and then people get in touch with you and they say, oh, the reason that stat you've used is inappropriate because of X, Y, Z, or the government gets in touch and says you're being unfair because of whatever, and you can kind of amend it as you go along. I don't mean where you've made complete blunders, but where you could get even closer to a very precise explanation of what's happened. So that is good. I think we can get onto social media because fake news and social media are kind of entwined and enmeshed. I think from my experience, I've had moments where I've tweeted something and it's gone a bit viral, and then someone's been in touch to say it's completely wrong. And your second tweet corrects it and it doesn't go viral. It never goes viral. No one ever retweets the clarification. And you feel like you are contributing to a world of fake news. And an example I would give is there was a Tony Blair story in the Sunday Times probably about a year ago. And it suggested that he'd done a speech in Sweden and the fee was a couple of £1 million. And or maybe it was that they weren't going to pay and he demands the $1 million or something. And the Sunday Times has just written it. And then if you stuck with the Sunday Times, you got to the end where the fee would have gone to his wife's charity, or there are things to kick Tony Blair over, and it wasn't one of them. And I felt quite bad that I'd just been sort of stamping on his head, and it turned out to not be fair.
Poor Tony Blair.
He can take it.
Yes.
Liz Mail. Can I ask both Jims and Nick, actually, please? How worried are you about Russian interference in our election?
Which of us looks most Russian? Which of us is interfering? Okay, well, quickly, we've at Buzzfeed written an awful lot on this stuff and on fake news in general. And I'm quite a cynic on fake news. I don't think there's a fake news problem in the UK. I think we've got what I term a bullshit news problem. We've got stuff which is factually accurate in the sense that every number is accurate, but the spin on it is rubbish. I'm not really concerned about Russian interference directly. I don't think it's quite operating like that in the UK. I also think that some of the reports on interference in the US are overblown. The idea that a few Twitter bots swung, Wisconsin is probably a bit fanciful. But then I would say that because I'm getting paid by the Russian government. But I'm kind of obsessed with the one. Okay, so here's one thing. If you leave tonight, go and check out the Russian embassy in the UK's Twitter account because it's one of my absolute obsessions. It is completely undiplomatic. It is terrible. It quotes Twitter polls as evidence. It posts very bad memes with screen grabs from 90s video games and says this is what the UK is doing to us. And it's kind of actually genius. It's basically how you should do diplomacy online because it's kind of funny and outrageous, and I can't stop reading it, and therefore they get their message across. So I'm not massively worried about direct interference, but I am very intrigued. I think soft power stuff like Russia Today and Sputnik and sites like that who are just spinning things against the government of the day are much more problematic and damaging than, secret, underhand hacking or whatever. Although obviously hacking of emails is a very different thing, and if anyone in the UK had their emails hacked, that would be absolutely massive.
I think as well that the question is who would Russia want to win in this election? So if they want everything to
Let's
be...
get the FD on the record on that.
Is this all Chatham House or are we all on the record? He says an hour into it.
Yeah, we are actually on the record, but sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if I was the Russian government, which I'm not, I would think a Jeremy Corbyn government could be quite fun because he sees certain things, like on NATO, for example, through a more Moscow-friendly vision than a US-friendly vision, certainly compared to most British politicians. But then again, Russia also quite like the breakup of the European Union, and it is our Tory Prime Minister who is helping that by carrying out a hard Brexit, or a reasonably hard Brexit. So goodness knows what the Russians, should they be trying to influence us, they would be doing. We're very interested in this theme as well. I have colleagues who've been doing a lot on this. So for example, during the Dutch elections, my colleagues had a very good bit of analysis where they'd taken the kind of spam bot mega tweeters who were, and there was a massive link between the ones who were sort of RT connected, Russia Today, and who were very much pro the guy with the Mozart hair. Can't even remember his name because he's history until the next Dutch election. Geert Wilders. But anyway, you could kind of see whether it just happened to be that people who like Geert Wilders happen to also like RT-type propaganda, maybe a coincidence, but there's some very good kind of analytical data journalism on that one that we did. and you have very senior people in the Trump administration admitting that Russia did get heavily involved in the election that saw Trump get in. So it's not a kind of a fantasy or that this is taking place or that they're trying to do this kind of stuff. And I take a different view to Jim about fake news, which is, I kind of agree that it's less potent here than America. I think there's possibly less of it around. But I think when you look at some of the stories and the reach that they had during the US election, just crazy made-up bonkers stuff, and people quite happily admitting they're sort of inventing stories about Trump shooting a Muslim or anti-Hillary stuff. And as someone who does like the world to be relatively enlightened and doesn't want us to go back into a kind of dark ages, I see this kind of collapsing of quality control in what people read as something that's really alarming. And there are people on the left in the House of Commons who they kind of think in their heads that maybe it's a good thing that the so-called gatekeepers of the news are losing their grip, and that your Daily Mails and Suns in particular are no longer setting the agenda. Firstly, these people are wrong, because if you look at Brexit, and I don't think Brexit would have happened without the big right-wing newspapers pushing it so hard. The Daily Mail having 10 or 15 pages of why the European Union is ghastly, like in a single day's edition. So firstly, I think these left-wing politicians are wrong about that. Secondly, I think the gradually weakening grip of large media organizations owned by billionaires or by big companies doesn't mean that it's going to be replaced by a kind of a new era where truth finally gets out, because you can already see the landscape just being muddied by absolute crap and lies and falsehoods. And I kind of find it a bit scary, and it explains an awful lot of what's happening in various elections around the world.
I came dangerously close to disagreeing with Jim on that one, but just quickly, basically, when I say bullshit news, I mean, I don't think there's 100% fake news in the UK, i.e. like, Theresa May to endorsed by the Pope, equivalent sort of stuff. But we have the spin on both sides of taking a set of statistics which are correct and then putting a preposterous, distorted headline on them is massive, and that is what actually gets read. So.
Yeah, and I agree with Jim that of course there's bias in British news. There's huge amounts of bias and very much on both sides. But I think there were kind of self-imposed limits of taste or appropriateness, whether that came from above or not, whereby certain papers would go a certain way to the right and certain papers would go certain ways to the left. But they weren't kind of endorsing quasi-fascism or quasi-communism, whereas the internet allows a lot of these kind of things that we remember not going very well in the 40s to potentially come back again. Is that unfair? Is it a bit mad?
That's the premise of the book I'm trying to pitch at the moment. Thank you.
That's interesting. Well, obviously, I don't have much of a view on this because it doesn't affect housing. So, but
go on.
A communist regime would be amazing for housing.
Well,
they would build millions of council houses.
Corbyn's quite keen on house prices coming down, and that would be very good for me. So, yes. But I mean,
he's keen on better weather as well, and clean underwear for everyone.
It's quite hard to argue with
all
his
the
core
time.
policies. Yeah. But what about the threat to you guys? Because I mean, obviously, yes.
What sorts of threats?
Well, so there's the insidious kind of fake news risk to society, and then there's the fake news risk to you guys, because every time you print a story that's true, they just turn around and go fake news. Now, I've seen it happen to the FT from relatively kind of what you'd assume would be sensible politicians.
Donald Trump.
Well, them too. But I mean, what do you do about that? And
in a sense, from the FT's perspective, not to be sort of blasé or complacent, but there are 5 or 6 billion people in the world, and we have a readership which is under 1 million. Whether you want to call them the global elite or what was the Theresa May description last autumn? The kind of people with citizens of nowhere,
Remainers,
and obviously not all our readers are any of those things, but. I'm trying to make the point that there are huge numbers of people on this planet. We only need to reach out to quite a small proportion of those who have sophisticated news tastes in order for us to make turnover and profit and survive. So there's competition out there, but for us, it's not coming from fake news. I think it's coming from loads of really good journalistic outlets out there are competing in the quality zone. We're not on our own out there. There are New York Times and Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, and Buzzfeed does some amazing stuff. So we really aren't complacent at all.
What do you think about the Westmonsters of the world, things like that? Are they just little kind of sideshows that should be ignored, or are they actually going to turn into...
So the piece I'm currently writing, which hopefully I'll get around to writing tomorrow, I haven't got any exclusives in it, but
Sorry to interrupt. Maybe actually just explain what Westmonster is.
Sorry, Westmonster is Aaron Banks, who is a former UKIP funder, who has, with Nigel Farage's former press spokesperson, attempted to do a cut-rate Breitbart. Which is another right-wing news outlet, so essentially sort of race hate sort of stuff. But I don't think it massively... You have to be, even if you're doing quite unpleasant coverage from a sort of basically Islamophobic perspective, it's an awful thing to say, you still have to actually do it quite well. So I'm not quite sure that they're taking off.
And on Twitter, Jim has 4 times as many followers as this entire news website. But maybe I'm being complacent and they're big on Facebook or something. I don't know.
They're not really. They're not really taking off. But the thing in the UK, and hopefully, I'm trying to coin the term alt-left basically for the UK, is there's a cluster of sites which are getting read by my count more than probably the Guardian, the Mirror, and everything combined. And you've probably never heard of them unless you're on Facebook a lot. They're things like Another Angry Voice, Evolve Politics. The Canary has a slight profile, but these are really small sites. But actually, if you look at their traffic, they are article for article being read by more people than broadsheets. Now, they're only appealing to a small group of hardcore Labour voters and generally Jeremy Corbyn supporters, but that is a serious media publishing powerhouse basically being run by about 4 people out of their bedrooms.
And do you think some of that is drifting into fake news, in that I see some stories coming out of these things which they're not even trying to get 2 sides of the story. They are projecting one side of one story.
Talking to these people, and it's fascinating because a lot of them are like, I've got 1 million readers a day and you're the first person who's ever asked me about this, which was very odd because often they were very uncomfortable with even talking about what they were doing. They say, yeah, we're biased. Yeah, we're massively biased. So's the Sun. The Tories have got the Sun and the Mail, and they will put a bias on every set of facts. Jeremy Corbyn has nothing, so we're providing that. Yeah, we're biased. Yeah, deal with it. We don't lie. We don't make up the quotes or the facts. We will spin them in the same way the Mail and the Sun do on the right. We're fighting fire with fire. So that was, and I actually couldn't really come up with a good argument against that. I'm in the tradition of you get a quote from both sides. They go, no, that's not, if the Tories get that, why should we play fair?
What's your take on that?
No, my take on that is that we just see the world very differently, which is one political side gives you some stats. There's almost always a counter argument or a reason why the stats aren't the whole story. There's always a reason why you need to kind of triangulate to try and work out what the truth is, because you never get the full story from simply
the truth
taking
is
one
very
angle
bad
or one.
For traffic. The truth is, I'm serious, it really is.
Yeah.
I think I kind of basically view most news in going in a direction. I read more good journalism than I've ever read, and it's amazing. You get sent a link from an obscure, New York magazine or something, and it's a 6,000-word in-depth feature on something, and you just read it on the train into work, and you go, wow, I'd have never bought that magazine. I'd have never read this writer, and the fact that one person who knows my sort of taste, who I follow on Twitter, linked to that, and it's brilliant. It's just the best time ever for reading good journalism. But the middle ground is dying, and you'll end up with the best good journalism ever and the worst mass journalism ever, and nothing in the middle.
And also, a lot of people tell themselves that they tell you, and they say, why can't we find somewhere where the actual facts are there? And why can't we have just unspun? I'm sick of hearing politicians giving 5 different angles to absolutely everything. And you say, well, have a look at this full fact website, which literally goes through in kind of agonizing detail the pros and cons of every single statistical or political argument out there. And this traffic's not bad, but it's not getting Canary-style or Breitbart-style hits because people are deceiving themselves when they tell themselves that they want a clear path through the truth, apart from a decent minority. But it's that, in my view, is not most of the general public.
I mean, are you a metropolitan elite? Is that a problem?
Well, we
and
both
Jim?
grew up in a rural part of North Yorkshire and now spend our times on panels in rooms in London.
You've got a bit of stubble there, haven't you?
You're not doing too badly yourself.
Yeah.
No, probably do fit that.
Is it a problem? Sorry, let's have some questions. Sorry. Okay. Right. Lady.
My name's Richard Blythe. I recently started subscribing to the FT and buying every Saturday, and also look at Buzzfeed. So my challenge would be, why do you assume that these are different audiences?
Well, the first thing I read every morning is the FT, weirdly enough, after I accidentally ended up being an insurance reporter for a year and didn't know what anything was, so took out a subscription and then got hooked. So I don't really feel weirdly they are massively different.
Yeah.
And it's good to hear that that's the case. I mean, the person reading are 23 Disney princesses which sum up your feelings after a night out is probably not yourself. But that person might might enjoy reading the politics article, and you might also enjoy reading that, but you're at the other end of the diagram. Maybe.
Yeah, and we do. I wouldn't presume that all our readers are different at all. I mean, this is kind of an answer to a totally different question, but in terms of how we pick content, there are times when the FT, as you know, there are times when the FT does stuff which is relatively frivolous or fun and not heavy at all, and it quite often gets masses of hits, especially if it has certain keywords in it or whatever. And the temptation, therefore, is that you start only doing stuff that gets masses of hits and goes viral. But we believe quite strongly that if something is brilliant and only 10,000 people read it, we would still rather have that than what David Cameron does with a pig or something, even if that might get 1 million hits. Because just so that we do stick to our core brand, which isn't about just chasing. I mean, the Telegraph, not to be mean to the Telegraph, but I'm pretty sure they used to have a big chart in the middle of their newsroom, which would sort of have these flashing lights and what's the most read thing at any given time. And if something dropped off, you could sort of see your serious story just dying, and the story about the woman with 3 nipples, which was at the top of this chart for weeks on end, apparently. But please don't quote me on that on social media. But that was Private Eye's account of it. So you just have to be kind of careful with where data drives you, I would say.
Facebook are trying to teach people what fake news is. Do you think that it is helpful for journalists, illustrious and credible journalists such as yourselves, to share more about the editorial process, about source selection, about what makes a good story and good news, so that the general public will understand how to be incredulous more effectively?
I don't think anyone wants to know how the sausage is made.
No, that's terrible.
That's a terrible idea.
Do you think Facebook are doomed to fail then?
Yes.
It's so unscientific, isn't it?
Okay, so here's the idea. If you're someone that's sharing fake news, you hate the mainstream media, you believe there's a world conspiracy, you're pissed off with the world, and a notice saying, have you considered reading the Telegraph's take on this instead, is just going to make you really angry. I mean, it is. You know,
or the Guardian's take.
I'm rejecting this take on the world. I'm sharing the Alex Jones conspiracy theory, David Icke link, and you're telling me that I'm wrong. Well, you're just another part of the conspiracy. You're just trying to keep. I don't think there's a way of winning without a massive cultural kind of shift. I think we've got to that point where everyone got to stage 1 that, you know, the newspapers don't tell you the truth, man. And then jump to stage 2, which is anything that tells you that the newspapers are lying is therefore the truth. And we kind of need to go to stage 3, which is basically everyone's talking a bit of bollocks. You've got to find your own way through this world.
And I think the thing that's most disturbing is when even something's patently just away with the fairies, it's still being consumed with relish. So the thing that got my goat last Thursday or Friday was when you could see the results coming in from France, and the BBC, they weren't reporting the numbers as they just come in. They were reporting the projected poll because the rural areas came in first and the cities later. So therefore, the figures you had at 5 p.m. weren't very good guidance. And as it was, the projection did turn out to be absolutely spot on. And there's some guy called David Vance, who's some kind of right-wing Twittery person. Sorry, David, if you're here. And he said, BBC, fake news. They're not giving us the actual number. They're giving us some other sort of number thing. And this was retweeted 400 times, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if those followers have a lot of followers, that is going to hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, depending on who was retweeting it. And it's the complete opposite of the truth. But then when you see people saying, no, David, this figure's this and that figure's that, there's just this incredible tumbleweed, because like you were saying, the truth seems to be quite boring to these people.
I happen to know, and there's an odd thing with Twitter where a small group of journalists end up getting affected by a few hundred obsessives who tweet at them all the time. And I happen to know this man who presumably is, I don't know who the hell he is, but he tweets at me, again, with like completely false stuff. So you get to know the names and the faces. But he was probably right in saying those numbers. You know, when he says the BBC isn't reporting these numbers, he's factually correct. You can't actually really debunk that. You can say contextually, well, yeah, but that doesn't matter. You're getting the wrong end of the stick there, mate. But
it's the fact that he's calling them fake news.
Yeah, but
you're fake news because
this is it.
I don't really understand
but
politics.
If you tried to sort of call him out on that, he'd get defensive. You can't. Basically, there's a lot of studies I've been reading recently where about the worst thing you can do with someone who's totally factually wrong is to fact check them, because they just get incredibly defensive and more sure of their own original view.
Yeah, the more you challenge it, the more they retreat into their bunker.
Is there anything you can do?
Of false news.
I just like pray.
Be better, be more interesting.
Be better, be more interesting, hope.
Be more consistent.
Yeah.
Because you sort of hope that after 2 years of reading David Vance's tweets, people might sort of think, maybe not all of that happened. Maybe I'll take him with more of a pinch of salt than I was when I was loving it.
Thanks, Robert Cohn. I'm an energy consultant. Even though the truth is possibly boring, should the media be doing more to communicate the dangers of climate change?
I think it's one of those things which is happening relatively slowly, like it's not an immediate news event. And secondly, I'm not a climate skeptic at all, but there has been data in recent years which it's not always pointed in the same direction. Would you agree with that?
No.
I mean, the FT takes it seriously. We've done a whole series on it. We've done Pelita Clark's won awards. He's our environment correspondent, has won awards with her reporting in particular about future water shortages and how the battle for water further down the line could be a problem and all the rest of it. There's part of me that just thinks that facing up to it is so terrifying that it's, I don't know.
Yeah, and so I don't cover it. I'm not even sure if it's probably a damning indictment myself. I'm not sure how many stories I've ever written on it. And we do have a science team who do write on it a lot. But that sort of siloing is probably part of the problem that, as a politics reporter, I'm not reporting on it. I think the real issue for our jobs is that it is, wrongly or rightly, it has become a political position, and that it's very hard to. So when the BBC had that discussion about whether do we stop reporting the other side, do we just say editorially this is a thing that's happening, we wouldn't entertain crazies on some of these other topics, why are we even entertaining giving airtime to climate skeptics on that side. Journalistically, when we're all in there's always two views on every story, when one is scientists saying, this hasn't happened yet, so we can't be 100% that it will, but my God, we're pretty sure it will. That's a pretty hard stance to wrap in. It's about the worst thing for the internet as well, where, if you think of the things that are definitely facts that we try and cover, and people still call us liars, even when you've got literally the name, the direct quote, their age, their job, where they're from, and they say you made up that quote. Trying to convince people who don't buy into that narrative on climate change, my God, the internet is made for climate skeptics.
I think to sort of take that forward as well into the world of politics, it used to be fairly simple, especially if you aspired to be completely objective in the way the FT does, was that you had a centre-left and a centre-right, and you try to be sort of muddle between them and give them fairness and all the rest of it, and so on. And if you take what's happened to the Labour Party in the last couple of years, we still have the Tories on one side, and then we have a Labour Party on the left, which is itself split down the middle. So if you were to give Corbyn, do you give Corbyn 100% balance with the Tories when half of his own party think that he's a kind of off-the-scale quasi-Trotskyist who would literally nationalise everything? And it sounds ludicrous, but Andy Murray, Chief of Staff at Unite, is still in the Communist Party. So, and half of the Labour Party think that so balancing between that, and then again with Trump, how does the political journalism world deal with someone who was considered by many to be beyond the pale 6 months ago, but now has to be treated, certainly has to be covered seriously, but these are quite complicated kind of ethical or philosophical questions for our profession, right?
Yeah, it really does terrify me making these calls, because I don't really, and a lot of them, there was the consensus was achieved. Things were led by Today programme, 5 or 6 papers, and once you broke into that consensus, then it became a thing. And now, we get more abuse for our coverage of Labour from the Labour left than we do from Tories, for instance. We get more, inter-Labour battles are much more furious, and it's the same with battles within it. Small differences and things that people get very, very angry about.
Lovely.
And even within the hard left, they all hate each other.
Yeah.
Ken hates John, and John hates Dave, and Dave's got a long-running row with Len, and they can't take each other seriously because there's so much kind of bitterness there.
Commonality.
Yeah.
Yes, it's behind for ease.
If you're talking about we're in a position where you're kind of polarising between news that's of no real quality and news that's of very great quality, is the inevitable endgame of that all the great quality stuff is behind a paywall?
I think a lot of it will be. I think, obviously, the super soaraway wonderful site Buzzfeed will remain outside a paywall because that's our business model. And we don't rely on display advertising. So actually, there's not much incentive for us to do news just for clicks, because our model is we make native ads. So our news operation is basically partly to get readers, but also partly to ensure that good people who run good companies don't understand the sort of project that we're on. So it's as much about really sort of showing off what we can do journalistically as it is about sort of getting high numbers for the sake of it. And actually, we'd never have a room in the newsroom with what's being read the most. That's what I say, when the weird thing is that places like the Telegraph are much more likely to do that than BuzzFeed. We're way more traditional than that. It's a real joke.
It's amazing when I look back at how our organisation saw the arrival of the internet. Like, clearly people saw that it was going to be a thing. I guess the thing that people didn't see completely was the arrival of the handheld. That was the most transformative.
Well, that was what allowed BuzzFeed to get going, really.
And for many years, I mean, we were onto it early. So there was an FT.com when I joined in '99 or whenever it was. But for years and years, it was kind of a parallel operation. So you had literally the web person would write about nuclear power companies' results and not talk to the energy correspondent on FT proper, who would be more experienced and probably know more about energy, and he'd do a kind of more polished version for the paper thing. And at some point between 1999 and 2017, that has obviously those barriers have disappeared. But yeah,
fantastic. Last few questions, because we're running a little bit out of time. At the back.
Hi guys, it's Vin, and I just wanted to ask all of you actually just 2 very quick questions. One, I think you mentioned kind of networks like Canary and Breitbart. Are there any networks that are specifically working in politics that really impress you, that have come out, new sort of names? And the very quick second question was around the kind of news verification agencies that are out there. There's kind of a new WikiLeaks or Wiki Tribune that's going to be released, something that kind of combat fake news. What's your kind of opinion on that and the whole verification of news agencies?
I mean, it sounds lovely, but I just fear that you picture the guy who's sat on the train looking at his Facebook feed, and we've not talked about how Facebook has these algorithms whereby you just get fed more and more stuff you agree with. So your likelihood of stumbling on both a Canary article and a Breitbart article becomes virtually impossible, which is a whole depressing thing. But the guy sat there, this amazing thing is shared by your mate, you trust your mate, and there's this thing telling you some awful thing about jihadis in Sweden or something, and the idea that you're going to sort of verify it by going to the separate site and does Wiki Tribune say that these guys are kosher or not? I'd love a world in where people did, but I don't really see it happening.
Yeah, I think I did think that the Wiki Tribune launch video was just a tiny bit patronising towards journalists. It's like, everyone's a liar, but here we are at Wikipedia, and we can sort you out. And it was like, thanks, guys. You know, some of us are trying our best. As for alternate networks, I always love on my commute in looking at what everyone's flicking through on their phone. And my main experience is that people are looking at the BBC News app, the Mail app, sometimes with generally people in their 20s and early 30s, the Buzzfeed app, or the predominant number of them are on Facebook. And they're flicking through Facebook, and they're pausing on a video for 10 seconds, and they're scrolling by. Then they're looking at a headline. I watched a woman scroll down Mail Online today on my way in, and I know it's just anecdotal, but it fascinated me because the headline was something like, you know, why is no one talking about this brutal immigrant murder in Sweden? ? And she looked at it for probably 10 seconds, looked at the pictures, didn't click it, just looked at the headline and then scrolled on by. And she was definitely taking that in. She was definitely thinking about it. She was definitely pausing on it, but she wasn't reading any of the supporting info. She'd just sort of seen that headline and thought about it for a bit, and that has probably like coloured her news intake for the day massively. So that's sort of the way I think that's the thing. You know, oh great, so you've got your fact-checking site that no one's looking at. Well, that's not really changing anything. I think you've got to have for-profit news that's factual and interests people, and hope that there's some way that I do think the amorality of Facebook's algorithm is a genuinely problematic thing for democracy, because it just and one quote from the guys that I was talking to today on the pro-Labour sites was, the reason my site does so well is if you follow the Mirror or the Guardian, there's a pro-Corbyn article, then there's some criticism of Corbyn, whereas mine is all pro-Corbyn and people prefer that.
Well, the only thing I would say, which is kind of unwinding some of the stuff I might have said earlier, is that there was, as always, there was never like a golden era where the man in the pub had his Guardian and his Sun for each half of his brain, the emotional side and the rational side, whichever is which, I don't know. There were always people who divided into tribes, whether it was left or right, or not reading any news at all, or taking in some news. And at least there are opportunities out there for people to absorb interesting stuff. And for me, you know, I've been reading publications kind of randomly, mostly through Twitter, that, if I'm being honest, I wasn't picking up 5 years ago, and I'm just stumbling on these wonderful kind of free-form 10,000 words about Mosul or something that might not have happened before. So it's not all bad and chaos and negativity and all the rest of it.
Whilst we've got a positive, I'm afraid to say I'm going to end on this positive note because I'm aware we're coming to the end of our time. If anyone's got any questions that they're desperate to ask, grab the gyms in the immediate.
Are we going to the pub? I thought we were going to the pub.
We are going to the pub, and I've been massively stitched up because I've been asked to buy the first round. So
for everyone,
all come.
Everyone,
literally everyone.
So somehow, regrettably, I'm going to buy you all a drink if you want one, but one. So we'll be crossing the road in a minute. But first of all, if we could say an enormous thank you to Jim and Jim for coming in. And also, just because if Gerald was here, he'd want me to say this. If you're not already an IBP member, please do go on the website and have a look and see what it's all about, and make sure you're entering the Journalism Awards this year. Brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. See you in the pub.